Thank you, Acting President Porter. And I want to thank the students, faculty, and staff who nominated me to speak today. I am really very humbled. On a personal note, I want to thank my sister, Devyani, a Stanford, she didn't know this was coming, a Stanford grad who flew up from San Francisco to listen to me talk for 10 minutes as if she hasn't had to listen to me talk at length since we were kids. Some of my old Reed friends who live in Portland are here today with us as well. I'm sure they feel as pinch me, this can't be real, seeing me up here as I feel now. Class of 2019, trust me, after what we all go through here in 4 very intense years, you are bonded to your Reed friends for life. And hey guys, my friends over here, just a reminder, those who knew me back then, what happened at Reed in the 1970s stays in the 1970s. Some of my daughter Anjali Clay's Reed class of 2017's friends are here too. Oh, she has a cheering squad. She so wanted to be here today. In any case, it's really sweet to come and listen to your friend's mom talk. Finally, I want to thank you, class of 2019, for choosing me as your commencement speaker. I am deeply honored. And again, please take an instant to turn to your parents, your friends, your lovers, your faculty advisors, and mentors, because no one gets through Reed alone, and give each other a great big hand. You deserve it. You know, there's another reason I am excited to be here today. I finally get to participate in a Reed commencement ceremony. When I graduated from Reed in 1980, my parents were living in South Korea, where my father's job had taken them, and they simply couldn't afford to fly over. I felt so sad they couldn't be here to attend commencement that after I turned in my thesis, I left Portland. Well, as it turned out, my parents weren't the only ones who weren't able to attend Commencement 1980. That day turned out to be far more momentous than anyone anticipated. Sunday, May 18th, 1980. Does that date ring any bells in the audience? That's the morning Mount St. Helens, located just 53 miles from here, literally blew its top off in a gigantic eruption. Yeah, Mount St. Helens erupted on the day of my Reed graduation. I'm really going to try not to read any kind of omen into that. The eruption of Mount St. Helens was a reminder of how volatile and unstable the Pacific Northwest is, sitting as it does along the Pacific Ring of Fire. Some of you may have read The Really Big One, an article published in The New Yorker in 2015. The subtitle sums it up: an earthquake will destroy a sizable portion of the coastal Northwest. The question is when. Well, luckily, the big one hasn't happened yet, and no one knows when it will. Let's all hope, geological time being what it is, it's many, many years from now. Or at least until I get on my flight out of here tomorrow. Seriously though, the truth is nothing lasts forever. I'm sure when you arrived at Reed as freshmen, your college years stretched out in front of you like an infinite expanse. And here you are today, all done. We know our planet won't last forever, but we hope it will remain inhabitable through your lifetime and those of your descendants for generations to come. But as all of you are aware, it's not looking so good. You are going to embark on your post-Reed lives in a world that is far more fraught than the one I graduated into in 1980, Mount St. Helens aside. From my generation to yours, I want to apologize for the state of the planet and for not forcing action far earlier to save it. But I also want to tell you it's far from over yet, and that as long as I live, I will do whatever I can and cheer young activists on to avert the worst. I mean, Greta Thunberg, right? Teenage climate activist shaking up the world. She's my hero. She's like amazing. No one knows how this is all going to play out, but we do know that we are living in a critical period, an era of mass extinctions of plant and animal life, of climate change inflicting more extreme weather, triggering mass migrations, threatening our food supply, and causing polar ice to melt at faster and faster rates. As if that weren't enough, the rise of ethnic nationalism and far-right populism is threatening the greatest guarantor of our freedoms, our democratic institutions. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism are on the rise in the United States and also in Europe, where I live. The hard-won rights of women, minorities, LGBT people, and immigrants, not to mention scientific inquiry, academic freedom, and free speech, are under attack. We are all called upon by these outrageous environmental and political circumstances to resist. There are many forms this resistance, thank you. There are many forms this resistance can take. At this point, it can be an act of defiance simply to be who you are, to embrace with pride your sexual identity, the color of your skin, your religious beliefs, or lack of religious beliefs. I mean, hell, just wear a Reed t-shirt with the motto communism, atheism, free love. I'm only partly kidding too. I exhort you, cherish what you learned here. Cherish science. Cherish the arts. Speak truth to power. Vote and help get out the vote. March in the streets if you are so moved. Resist fear. Refuse hate. Spread love. These are vital, necessary acts. As Reed graduates, thanks. As Reed graduates, you have been initiated into what the Reed College mission statement calls the intrinsic value of intellectual pursuit, governed by the highest standards of scholarly practice, critical thought, and creativity. These values have never been more precious than they are today. You know, I remember a visit I made as a 9-year-old to some very rich relatives in Bombay, India. I remember the black and white marble floors, the teak fans slowly turning overhead. The family had made a fortune in Burma, then lost it after the Japanese bombed Rangoon in 1942. Then they'd clawed their way back. The head of the family, an elderly man, dressed in the Gandhian style of a simple white cotton dhoti, gave me a little present. As he tucked it into my hand, he said, looking at me straight in the eyes, "Remember, money can be made and lost, but an education can never be taken away from you." I have never forgotten his words, and there is no doubt in my mind that it was the education I received at Reed College that allowed me to have an incredibly rich and improbable professional life. I am a woman of mixed ethnic heritage, Asian Indian and Danish American. There was almost nothing I studied here that spoke directly to my origins. There weren't many non-white students at Reed in the mid-70s, and I'm glad to see that's beginning to change. And yet with a degree in French, I became an author of books on India and an editorialist at the New York Times. And that was made possible by the education I received here, where more than the content of what I studied, I learned to think critically, to make connections between seemingly disparate phenomena, to argue a point of view and express myself cogently. It is these skills more than the biology or the literature or the history or whatever else you majored in that will serve you, class of 2019, the rest of your lives. Think of your Reed education as your existential toolkit. Honestly, if my life is any gauge, you can do anything. After a year off playing hooky as a street musician in Paris, I returned to Reed and finished a degree in French. Went on to get a PhD in French at UC Berkeley and was hired as a professor of French at Louisiana State University. So far, on track. But then, appalled at the idea of living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana for the rest of my life, no offense to any, to any Louisianans out there, I'm sure it was just the humidity. I put everything I owned into my Subaru and drove to New York City, not really knowing what I would do. I ended up working for a high-powered public relations firm on things like cross-border mergers and acquisitions. I made some money, and I could have made more, but I got bored. Then out of that high-flying New York international business world, I got hooked up with the World Policy Institute at the New School, and I started writing op-eds on India. My Indian grandmother died. I missed her. I wrote a memoir about the Indian diaspora. It won a couple of prizes. I wrote another book about India that did well. I found myself pegged as an India expert with degrees in French. I mean, who could imagine? Then in 2010, I won a Fulbright Senior Scholarship for a project on India in Paris, and I decided to stay in France. Again, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I did some teaching at Sciences Po, and then I was contacted by the New York Times editorial board out of the blue in 2013 when the Times did away with the International Herald Tribune, which I really still miss as a newspaper, but someone had read something I wrote. And having never worked as a journalist, I wrote up to 12 editorials a month for the next more than 4 years. I wrote on the terrorist attacks in Paris in 2015, on Europe's migration crisis, on mass executions in Saudi Arabia, on the disappearance of our forests, on plastics in our oceans, and on all sorts of other topics that seemed urgent and wrong and important to set right. Last year, I returned to my own writing, publishing another book on India, as well as my first book in French, a collection of columns inspired by Hindi words for the French weekly Courrier International. Now I'm writing a new book on Paris based on stories I've published in the New York Times and in the New York Review of Books, and so in a way, I've come full circle. I am 61 years old, which probably sounds very old to you. I'm actually probably older than most of your parents. But you know, standing up here, I remember Ren Fair back in the 70s on these lawns like it was yesterday. And oh boy, were there some gifted chemistry students at Reed in those days. And I still feel today the same intellectual passion and the same urgency to make a difference in this world as I did back then. And you may find this incredible, but I also still feel the same fear of failure and doubt that I felt when I arrived on this campus as a 17-year-old from a middle-class family that couldn't afford Reed tuition. I had gone to a working-class high school in Eugene that had never before sent a student to Reed, just 100 miles north. At Reed, I met for the first time kids who had trust funds and had been to elite boarding schools and had already read books I had never heard of before. Kids whose parents were famous or rich or both. I owe a great debt to Richard Dent, the Reed College financial aid officer at the time, who always found a way to make sure I got the financial aid I needed. So Dick, wherever you are, thank you so much. I had dinner recently with an extremely famous author in New York, whom I'm not going to name here since this is going up on the internet and everything. He's a decade older than I am, and he just finished his latest book. People who've read it say it's good. I don't know, he said, looking away from me. We'll see what the reviews say. The fear of failure that some of you may feel now just never goes away. But as long as you have a passion for what you do and the satisfaction of making a positive difference, no matter how small, you'll be okay. Opportunities will present themselves to you that you cannot imagine now. That's how life is. So, class of 2019, my core message to you as you set forth from this day is, to paraphrase Ernest Hemingway on Paris, I can get away with this, right? Because I live in Paris. A Reed education is a movable feast. You saw that coming. But seriously, you get to take it with you, and no one can take it away. Revel in it. I wish each and all of you great good luck on your life's adventure. Welcome to the distinguished ranks of Reed College alumni. We are very proud to have you join us. Thank you.